Great. We've got quite a few attendees now, so I'm going to kick things off. Firstly, thank you for being here today on our webinar to talk with Ardent partners on their latest State of ePayables report for 2025. This is entitled AP's Unfinished Journey. This is the 20th, would you believe it, ePayables report and part of an ongoing dialogue that Ardent Partners has had with AP, finance, and P2B experts over the last 2 decades. The report looks into general competencies, capabilities of AP departments, and highlights management strategies that leading organizations have utilized to drive improvements over the last few years. And it also examines top priorities for 2025 and beyond, including, but not limited to, artificial intelligence. So I welcome today Andrew Bartolini, who will be stepping through the findings of the report. We'll do formal introductions in a minute, but I'm really pleased to have Andrew here with me today, who has over a 20-year career in the source to settle space, and look forward to hearing from him on the report findings.
Great.
A little bit of housekeeping first. So we'll aim to wrap up within the hour. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask them through the Q&A tab, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen there. Don't click the chat panel. I think that's been deactivated, so we'll just use the Q&A tab for any questions. Everyone will be muted throughout the conversation, but what I'll try to do, if we do have any questions, I'll try and weave those questions into the conversation with Andrew. There will be a post-webinar survey, so we really appreciate your feedback. If you have the opportunity to give us any feedback at all, that's really good because we can use it to try and shape future events. So that's very much appreciated. If in the event you need to leave early, we will be sending everybody a recording for you to get a chance to rewatch. So don't worry, you won't miss any of the content, and you'll also get a copy of the report, the Ardent Partners ePayables report for this year, which we'll send out to accompany the recording as well. Quick introduction of me on the next slide, Andrew. My name's Dan Young. I've been with a company called TradeShift for just over 10 years now, and I run their solutions consulting team. TradeShift is a global business network that connects organizations for the purposes of digitizing the typical transaction flows between buyers and their supply chains. We deal with electronic invoicing, accounts payable transformation, procurement transformation, and marketplaces. I'll go into a little bit more towards the end of this presentation. More broadly, I've been in the accounts payable transformation space for about 21 years, working in North America and across Europe. So really looking forward to getting into this topic with Andrew today, and over to you to kick things off.
Yeah, great. Hello, good day, everybody. I'm Andrew Bartolini. I'm coming to you from very cold Boston today. Single digits in the temperature, but I've got I'm getting warmed up just thinking about all of the great findings that we've collected in this year's survey. I'm the founder and chief research officer at Ardent Partners. I've been working in space for about 25 years. Locked in on the source to pay space. Been doing research for about 20 years, and the last 16 of those at Ardent Partners. The agenda that you see here today, Dan and I are going to walk you through this agenda, which maps to the State of ePayables report, right? So that's a report that I've been writing for 20 years. AP's come a long way, but the journey is still unfinished. Again, really want to thank TradeShift for bringing me in to talk about some of the key findings. So for those of you that are less familiar with Ardent Partners, we are a boutique research and advisory firm that is laser focused on the source to pay process. We do market research, we do technology evaluations, we do a bunch of different things like present on webinars. If you find that today's presentation was interesting, I encourage you to visit ardentpartners.com. We do have a site also that is focused on AP and AP automation called payablesplace.com. Invite you to check us out there too. So, Dan, what do you say we dive into look at a little bit of the research. Before we do exactly that, though, I do like to share the demographics of the data, right? So this is a sort of a data-filled presentation. Lots of great, questions and insights and findings. We're also going to do a little real-time research with a couple of polls to keep it interesting and see if today's audience maps to the audience that has participated in our survey this year. What you can see here is that we surveyed 204 practitioners, right? So, we at Ardent Partners follow a very rigorous methodology to our research, but essentially we craft a web-based survey and then promote it out to our community of AP and P2P and procurement professionals. And so we're surveying practitioners, right? Not consultants, not people who work at software companies. And what you can see here from a data standpoint is that the data is, largely AP, finance, P2P, a little bit of procurement. It's a more senior audience than you might see in some other research. The company demographics, right, I think are the thing that's interesting, right? AP does have great commonalities across companies of all different sizes. Our data does tilt towards large revenue. Our data does tilt towards North America, but there's a very strong concentration in EMEA. So, for those of you listening in today, the data should be generally relevant to your organizations. And then from an industry standpoint, it's very horizontal in nature. And again, I think that speaks to the great commonality of AP, right? From a process standpoint, from a best in class standpoint, from a best practices, and from a technology standpoint. Lots of shared our areas within the profession. Now, Dan mentioned, and I've already mentioned as well, that this is the 20th time that I've actually written a report, this specific report. And, it's really been, a fascinating ride to see AP evolve over the past 20 years from an organization that was highly siloed, almost fully manual, and to see where it has gotten to today, right? And we're gonna show some indications that really point to the trajectory of AP, right? Again, have come a long way. And Dan, I know you've seen this at TradeShift as well with your customers, but still a long way to go. So let's dive into the research, the real-time research. Right. So first question here is, right, how valuable is AP? And the question is not how valuable is AP to you, but how valuable is AP from a perception standpoint, from a reality standpoint, from an overall impact standpoint to the enterprise? And you've got a couple choices here, right? Right. Exceptionally valuable, very valuable, somewhat valuable, less valuable. So we'll give the audience a few seconds here. When we talk about sort of the evolution of AP, right, it hasn't been a revolution, right? It has been sort of steady and sort of continually building up and to the right from a performance standpoint and from an impact standpoint. We'll see if the audience here, what they can show us from a perception standpoint. Very. I'll take that. I'll take that over the other options, right? So, interesting that none have low. Dan, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the results they kind of corroborate what we saw in the report, right? Which is AP is being viewed more strategically, perhaps, than previously. Do you have any observations in terms of why that's the case, or what strategies AP teams are using to result in this type of response?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the interesting thing here is that 90% are at the very or exceptional, which tracks ahead of the survey results here, right? Which show this is about, so yellow being exceptional, green being very. That was 93% of the audience today, which tracks ahead of the 68% that the market's seen. So about two-thirds of AP organizations are viewed as making a significant impact on the organization. I think that, so you could trace this back 20 years. You could go back to the pandemic where I think, organizations, finance leaders saw that, they were having to set, finance leaders of AP organizations that were mostly manual were having to send their staffers in to the office for business continuity reasons and for just sort of ongoing need to maintain supplier relationships. And it probably struck many as a little absurd to send this staff into what was at the time, right? The risks were unknown. And it didn't seem like opening up letters or managing PDFs was needed to be essential work. And so there's been a drive in a shift away, and that period of time really has driven a significant investment in AP technology. But I think the larger driver of why AP is is becoming more valuable, both from a perception standpoint and from a reality standpoint, is the intelligence, right? The information that AP creates and processes is valuable to AP from an operational excellence standpoint, right? If we can track what we're doing, we can improve upon it. But the information is also extremely valuable to Treasury, right? So from a cash management function, right? So if your organization has a treasurer, one of the largest functions of cash disbursement within any organization is AP, right? Paying its suppliers, right? In all industries. And so taking a more strategic focus on that, in a period of time where interest rates have increased, right? So in the 12 years after the Great Recession, right? The cost of capital was very low. That's changed, and we're not going to go back to that low cost credit environment, even if they do reduce rates over the past couple of years. But also on the procurement side, right? A greater understanding that with all the supply outages that we experienced and witnessed, during the pandemic and in the immediate aftermath, having tight relationships with your strategic suppliers so that you become the preferred customer, AP can play a significant role in that too. So, um, more valuable, but not without challenges. Right. And so, when we look at, what are AP's top challenges this year, right? You look at, approvals taking too long, high percentage of exceptions, right? And I would say that, while tariffs, inflation, geopolitical tensions, and market volatility have created a pervasive sense of uncertainty in business, the most common challenges, cited by AP in this survey hit much closer to home. And when I look at most of the challenges here, the underlying factor is still that there's too much manual activity. There's still too many, so whether it's a paper envelope sent through snail mail or a PDF that's sent via email, right? The lack of sort of a digital transaction is problematic and continues to be a problem. Fraud risk would be one that I would also call out that, again, sort of using the pandemic as a milestone in AP's evolution, right? It is also from a fraud standpoint, a jumping off point where fraudsters saw the opportunity to attempt to take advantage of the dislocated or the no longer centralized operations within organizations. And so I think pretty interesting here. Again, not too dissimilar from the challenges we've seen in the past, although the high percentage of exceptions has risen in recent years and maybe is at an all-time high here. So
I think it's
AP's top challenges, yeah.
interesting on that previous slide that there are connections between the two. So, for example, lack of visibility into invoice and payment data can increase your fraud risk. High percentage of exceptions can lead to late supply and payments, and staffing shortages kind of impacts all of the above, right? So it's quite closely interconnected, all of these things.
I'd say absolutely. I think that's a great insight. So, what are the top priorities, right? And so when we talk about AP becoming more strategic, right? There's the perception, there's the metrics that we're going to talk about and how they've improved, pretty dramatically over the past 20 years and even more recently. But it used to be that AP's top priorities were to reduce processing costs and to be as efficient of an organization as possible. I think that with the rise in AP, the rise in AI and its strong promise of really transforming business more broadly. We can debate the timeline of that and talk about that in a little bit more depth, and we will in a few slides. But the improving AP reporting and data analytics, right? So becoming a more intelligent operation and having that as one of the top priorities is also an indication that we're moving away from some of the baseline greenfield struggling AP departments to something that is, more consistent with the challenges of other larger, more sophisticated functions within the enterprise.
Quick question, Andrew. To what
Sure.
degree do you think this kind of ever-changing e-invoicing mandates and clearance mandates are impacting top priorities? Because what we see amongst our customers is that that's really kind of front of mind at the moment, especially I should pre-say that across Europe, especially because we're driving against this VIDA mandate for 2030,
Mm.
where all EU
Yeah.
countries have to comply.
Yeah, yeah. So when I look at something like the different global e-invoicing mandates, right? So this is where different countries have regulatory policies, rules and regulations and laws that require their invoices to go through some type of governmental centralized processing, right? So this is to ensure that they are capturing the tax revenues that they are due. This is a long-term trend, and it's a global trend that makes who you um, transact with and where they are based and where you are based adds a level of complexity to the supplier relationship and to overall supply management, much in the same way that tariffs do as well. And so, anytime you're dealing with an environment that adds complexity to the supplier relationship, AP's expertise and the use of technology becomes more important. And as a result, the role of AP becomes more important, right? We look at Germany as an example, right? They have, introduced, a timeline and then reintroduced the timeline and changed the scope of, who's going to be involved in an optional period of time and then something that's going to be more mandated. It can become very confusing. And, the challenge is that it falls to AP to really be the experts here. And so, um, you have the tariff overlay as well, where organizations, right, at least from those based in the United States, are having to rethink their supplier relationships based solely on where their suppliers are producing that supply, where's the country of origin. And so AP's involvement in that, in a similar way, needing to understand, well, what are the implications if we move our supply from the current country to this other country? Are there invoicing implications that need to be considered? So great question. Right. So the state of ePayables, right? So this is a section where we look a little bit more at the systems and how technology is really helping to drive the AP transformation. So, there's still too much paper in this in AP and there's still much potential too, right? And these things are related. So what I'm showing you here are the percentages of electronic and manual, both invoices and payments. So invoices submitted, payments made. You can see here that, it's only been, Dan, I think a couple of years where the the majority of invoices, in the market overall, are electronic, right? And so part of this is going to be a little bit more regional, with Europe, the EU more specifically ahead of the rest of the world. On the payment side, I think that what this is tracking is percentage of payments and not the percentage of spend. And so you have a lot of card transactions and sort of the smaller, very tactical spend that are done electronically with sort of those one-off spot buys. Um, but it's an interesting chart. What do you think, Dan?
I'm actually encouraged that the e-invoices especially is continuing to trend upwards. And I actually think this will accelerate quite a lot in the coming years based on the conversation we just had around mandates. The UK government, for example, came out in the recent budget that we had in November,
Mhm.
announcing that there's going to be a move for UK businesses by 2029 to move to a electronic invoicing model. So this is going to be a trend that continues. And I'm actually hopeful that that will impact some of those other challenges that we saw in the previous slide, because I think if your AP process starts with good digital data, then it has kind of a knock-on effect to better straight-through processing, less exceptions, better visibility, and all of those things that AP teams are striving to achieve.
Yeah, I would say absolutely right. I mean, there's a couple of forces blowing at the back of the trend to automate more. The global invoicing mandates in different countries, the opportunity with AI. I mean, just the baseline efficiency, but also the need for more flexibility and agility, right? If you're doing things in an electronic format, your ability to gain insight, but to shift spend and trade your suppliers out becomes much easier if you're dealing in a much more automated world. Another driver of that is fraud. Right. And so what we're asking, what this slide is showing to you is, where is AP, beyond sort of the standard AP remit, where else is AP at least moderately involved, right? So this is another factor that explains why we believe that AP is becoming more strategic, is because AP is becoming more strategic by doing all of these things. And so the numbers aren't overwhelming, except in the other area, right, of fraud prevention, right? Our research has shown, a pretty dramatic uptick in fraud attempts. The successful fraud attempts are not necessarily well reported, right? Companies aren't excuse me, looking to highlight that in the news and then the reality is that many organizations don't realize that those attempts have occurred. But fraud, another area that's going to drive investment in AP automation. There are certainly these overlay technologies that can, protect your larger enterprise and its systems against fraud attacks. But the first step, the clearest step to preventing fraud in a P2P transaction is having automation and having solutions that manage those transactions and sort of closing the loop there.
It's quite a notable percentage there under fraud prevention, isn't it? I think technology is great for automating AP processes, but also criminals and people who want to commit fraud are using technology to find new innovative ways to try and get money out of organizations. There was a report last year from the UK government under the Economic Crime Survey, and it said over 1 in 4 businesses in the UK have experienced fraud in the last 12 months. 11% of that is from a fake invoice fraud, and another 7% from fraudsters trying to get organizations to change bank details and subvert the flow of working capital, right? So it's
Yeah, and AP should be on the front lines here. And I think that the reality is that the fraud attempts, that's a trend that's only going to accelerate because the fraudsters are using AI and they're getting more sophisticated in how they are attempting to disrupt and steal. Right. So so Dan, here's a chart, right? So ePayables adoption rates, right? So Ardent Partners uses the term ePayables to describe any technology that automates all or some part of the AP process, right? So invoice receiving, the processing, and then the payment and execution of those payments. What we see here is numbers that have again gotten consistently better over time, but still not where we'd like to see them. I do think that, what we've been calling AI FOMO, right? The fear of missing out on AI, is something that's real and should drive these numbers higher over the next couple of years. Time will tell. I think that the the interest, is, younger companies are starting, their AP departments, digitally, right? So starting from the beginning. So it becomes less about a digital transformation and really, just sort of the baseline case of where, um, you know, how AP does its work. And I think also that the reality is there's the beginning of a generational shift in employment. That if you're looking to attract people to AP, and it's not always the first stop on, somebody's list of where they'd like to work within a company. But the reality is that new graduates coming into the workforce, I think their expectation, and reasonably so, is that they're working in a digital environment. So something to consider there. So there's other ways to look at automation, right? So we showed you enterprises and the percentage of enterprises that adopted the different technologies. We also asked the question of, how automated are you at the task level within AP, right? So travel and expense management, invoice approvals, all the way down to exception management. And the question is, are you fully automated, yellow? Are you partially automated, green? Or are you not automated at all? And I look at this chart and I say, you know, there's far too much of the partially and not automated, right? Um, than what is desirable. And again, getting to a fully automated world for all of these is something that takes time. It takes focus. It takes a sort of organizational drive to work towards those goals. Those should ultimately be the goal for particularly the tactical aspects of the AP process. And so Dan, let me pull you in, right? So obviously trade shift helps across a lot of these areas. How does TradeShift fit into this slide?
We are spend notable here is the supplier onboarding, cash management, and exception management. So these are all things that are incredibly difficult and messy to automate. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me that they're at the bottom of the list. But where we are investing a lot of time and effort is in data management and reporting and analytics, because
Hmm.
we think if there's good data and we make visible some of the anomalies and some of the exceptions to power users, then operators can make smarter decisions effectively. So if you go back 10 or 15 years, analytics isn't a new thing. People have always wanted access to information, but with these LLM models, with generative AI and with natural language processing, we're actually putting the power user, putting the data at their fingertips so they can ask any number of different questions in a command prompt and get real-time metrics out of the data that underpins their accounts payable program. So a good example might be, how many invoices are an exception in the month of September from a particular supplier, and it'll
Right.
it will give you that data immediately. So hopefully, and I'm sure you've seen this, back in the day, every AP team wanted a slightly different uh, a report effectively on how they want that information represented to their C-suite.
Hmm.
Whereas this type of technology with Gen AI, it's actually putting that data at the fingerprints of the user so they can get it almost immediately.
Yeah, yeah, right. And just to use your example, right, around exception management, right? If you're over in the red with your exception management processes, one, you probably don't have visibility as to how many exceptions came from that supplier. And, in the sort of the Pareto analysis or the bell curve, right, you don't understand who your 20% of problematic suppliers are.
Yeah.
And your team is solving and then resolving the same problem consistently month after month, quarter after quarter, whatever the invoice cadence is with those problematic suppliers. But the reality is, and we're going to start to talk about AI in a second, AI is a technology that, in some parts algorithmic based, and we don't need to get into all of the fine details, but you should be thinking about what is the data that's going to drive your solutions when you have AI, and it's not a question of if, it's a question of when your AP organization is going to start to leverage AI. But if you don't have, if you're in the partially or not automated areas, your systems aren't capturing the data or creating the data that is going to be needed to drive your models and to drive an intelligent sort of move forward and to get the full leverage out of AI. So you should be thinking about automation today. You should be thinking about data models today if you are thinking about AI, right? You can't separate those concepts, right? They're all intertwined. And so, Dan, you ready for a little bit more real-time research?
Yes, yeah, let's find out from the audience what some the next poll.
All right. So big question here, right? You know, what, you know, how do you describe your use of AI today? Are you using it? Do you plan to use it? Or do you have no plans currently to use it, right? Pretty straightforward, right? Hopefully we can get everybody who's listening in to participate. We had a smaller number last time. Dan and I can't vote, so we at Ardent Partners are using AI. We're not large enough to have an AP team, but that's a separate story. The It'll be very interesting to see the trends here. So whenever we think that's ready, I don't have visibility. Okay. Okay. So it's on the radar screen. It's not on the laptops. It's not on the desktops yet, right? So you can see we've got a little bit more than 20%, so 1 in 5 using AI today. Good plans for the other group, right? So that's gets us to 80, almost 85%. Another group, no plans currently, which is fine. I think each organization, has to understand where it is, and we'll talk a lot about that. We at Ardent Partners, we've published a lot on AI playbooks and AI readiness and how you need to think about these new technologies. But let's talk about what are the adoption rates of AI by AP teams, right? And so, what we see here, you know, audience today a little bit behind, but when you sort of add where the audience today is and our survey group, which again they took the survey a few months before this poll, but about was that that's about 80%, 78% that will be using AI by early next year. And so, that gets us to the same place. And again, I do stand by the the comment that it's not a question of if you're going to use AI, it's a question of when. I think that, from Ardent's perspective, we really do see AI as one of those transformational technologies, much in the same way of the internet. Move to the cloud to a degree, I think is another sort of similar, technology shift for enterprise technology I'm talking about. The timing of when the AI becomes truly transformational versus impactful. I think, there's a legitimate debate about that, but the reality is that AI is here. Dan, TradeShift has AI. Where what are you doing with AI today? And maybe let's ask you the question, right? You guys are deploying and your customers are using AI, but then also, where are you going over the next 12 months?
One of the biggest challenges, and I'm sure people on the call who have rolled out AP automation solutions or procurement automation solutions, one of the biggest challenges that departments have is adoption. And actually, you don't want to have to roll out, weeks worth of training to 1,000 users in your business, or try to train sometimes 20 or 30,000 suppliers that you're connected with. So user adoption and supplier adoption is a really big issue sometimes and can make or break your AP automation plans. So we're using generative AI as a full 24/7 digital assistant for people within an enterprise to be able to use the system, navigate their approvals, get help along the way, and also for suppliers to understand how the supplier portal works, how to submit invoices either through the portal itself or electronically. We're also seeing, my history and pedigree is in accounts payable and OCR solutions.
Hmm.
So I've spent a lot of time in the past putting OCR solutions in place for customers, and the level of accuracy and automation you get from legacy technologies, you're always along the 70 to 90% extraction rate accuracy if it's working well. What I've seen with generative AI is as a real impact on data quality in terms of extraction. So you can try this yourself. I uploaded a picture of my family to ChatGPT recently, and I wanted some people removed from the image. And
Hmm.
actually, the ChatGPT removed the background characters in the picture and left my family kind of in the portrait image. So it's really good with context. And
Hmm.
likewise, it's good with invoice images as well. So I've seen, the messiest of invoices, transportation logistics invoices sent into generative AI that we use, and it'll actually have a really good chance of reading all of the information accurately. Um, and I think I mentioned reporting and analytics, so we've
Sure.
invested quite a lot in that space. But where
Hmm.
we are going is around anomaly detection as well. So using the data model and using the intelligence of generative AI to be able to spot these anomalies, identify fraud, identify bank account change requests and things like that, and serve that information up to the power user so they can make good decisions.
Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. And so I think we've got. I'll get the slide up this time for the next poll, right? So main question here is, what do you think AI's impact is going to be on your AP operation over the next 2 to 3 years? Is it transformational, significant, moderate, insignificant, or maybe you're not sure? Give it a second here. What is the enthusiasm related to AI for the audience today? All right. All right. Um, I guess key takeaway here is that significant transformational, what's that, 78, almost 80%. Am I getting that right? Yeah. 77%. Doing the maths, as some might say. Yeah, I think that, the reality is that the way that AI is deployed, right? So it's not something that you and your finance team and your IT department just go out to the store and say, oh, we'd like to bring some AI into the operation. The reality is that how you access AI is through the technologies that you're already using or that you're going to use that automate your AP operation. We at Ardent are, very optimistic about the impact of AI on AP within procurement as well. But that is simply a reflection of what the survey data, right? Our community is telling us, right? There's a belief that I'd say fairly similar numbers are not too dissimilar here. That the majority believe that over the next couple of years, AI is going to have at least a significant impact on operations, right? And that's very telling, right? I think with the initial deployments over the past, call it 2 years, and again, we're sort of talking about the new AI. I know that with machine learning and some of the sort of technologies that are legitimately AI. We've had since the launch of ChatGPT and the LLMs sort of a broader understanding of all of the different types of AI, including agentic, which is something that I think is very promising and will be very impactful. Again, in 2026, will it be entirely transformational? you know, I guess we'll have to wait and see. But there's a huge value in, the opportunity to automate an additional 15 to 20% on a task. And if you go back to thinking about the none, the partially, and the fully automated tasks that you have, right? By getting more of those tasks more fully automated, right? There's a significant bump in efficiency, by beginning to sort of leverage the analytics in a more forward-looking way, and really leveraging the power of AI's capabilities from a predictive standpoint, your cash management function, right? I mean, these are all, we could probably just spend an hour talking about the different opportunities within AI. Dan, when you think about, AI and its impact, I mean, you have customers using it today. I mean, where do they fall on the pie scale?
Yeah, I think significant is the right place. When I talk to AP customers today, there's sometimes, we're talking to accountants and finance teams, so by
Mhm.
nature, more risk averse, and there's a caution perhaps in putting a technology in place that takes over all of the back office. Operators still want decision-making power, and they're reluctant to relinquish that decision-making ability to a technology. So I think vendors like ourselves, like Tradeshift, we need to do a good job in explaining the use cases and where it adds most value to a back office, and but still retaining the power users and the AP strategic users as the decision makers in the process.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So why are organization, what are AP leaders looking to gain from their investment in AI? Increase automation, better forecasting, reducing the budget, stakeholder satisfaction, right? I mean, when we talk about AI, I tend to think of it as a force multiplier, right? It is a force multiplier from an automation standpoint. It's a force automation. It's a force multiplier from an intelligence standpoint, and it's a force multiplier from a stakeholder engagement standpoint, right? You've got, giving people, the occasional users of your AP systems, information in the context of who they are and the task or activity that they're focused on, drives a better experience, drives greater adoption, drives faster cycle times and better usage overall. So let's look at metrics, right? So one of the things that we like to do in all of our research studies is capture metrics that are important to the organizations, right? And the challenge for all AP leaders is to push higher. But that push must incorporate a view of the stakeholders and suppliers working within and beyond the enterprise. So let's look at some of the key benchmarks. But first, let's look at what are the drivers of future AP success. Again, right, Dan, sort of going back to AP becoming more strategic, AP on a path to adding more value. Um, Future success says, smarter systems, right? We were probably about a decade ago, we started talking about an intelligent AP operation, an intelligent source to pay operation, right? Procurement and AP together. Um, and the premise was that, there's going to be technology and you need to automate and you'd have to have analytics. Now with AI sort of, injecting itself into the conversation, injecting itself into the technologies, there really is a path forward here. I think that, the data-driven, intelligent AP operation, is no longer sort of something far out on the horizon. It's something that is, much more within grasp. And so it makes it very exciting to be working in AP. Now, um, the benchmarks, right? And so what we do each year is we capture, the performance from all of the survey participants in areas that we think are important for AP to track. There's generally a percentage of the survey participants that are not able to track those metrics, right? And that in itself is a telling factor. And so, we track these numbers over the years, and when you look at them over the longer arc of this research series, we see that the cost to process is dropped by more than 50%. The time to process also by more than 50%. And the things like invoices processed straight through have almost doubled. The number of suppliers that are operating and able to transact electronically also growing. So, I think these are good benchmarks, barring anything else, right? If you're looking to understand where you as an AP organization are today relative to the market.
It's interesting to see those trends on invoice cost and exception rates. Just explain that a little bit. Does that imply that they're getting worse or
Yeah. So yeah, it's right. So declining in red actually mean, so while going down would be good, declining in this case means that the trend is worsening. And so
okay.
cost to process a single invoice, right? I think, is most easily explained by the fact that we're dealing in a period of higher inflation where the costs of all of the overhead that go into the processing costs, right? So it's an all-inclusive cost, right? So it's staff, it's overhead, um, in general, those costs have risen. So that can be something to explain. The invoice exception rate is one that it really did jump over the past 2 years. In our next survey, we're going to ask actually a more specific follow-on to get a little bit more of the details there. I don't know if it's heightened awareness, and better visibility into the overall process, but something to be concerned about if your invoice exception rate is increasing and not decreasing. It's a great question there, Dan. Um, when we look at the metrics and when anytime Ardent Partners does a market research study, and we've done more than 120 of those over the past years. We try to segment out the top performers, the group that we call the best in class. In this case, in Ardent's research, the best in class is defined as the top 20% of performers in any given study. In this case, it's the top 20% based upon their cost to process an invoice being the lowest, and their time to process a single invoice being the lowest. And then in the report, we go into more detail to basically deconstruct the best-in-class operation. What is it that these organizations are doing to deliver such a competitive advantage from a financial standpoint, from a processing standpoint, from all of the key metrics here that you see, and to understand, what are the tools that they're using? What are the strategies they employ? What are the things that they avoid? And what you can see here is that the best in class, process their invoices at a significantly reduced rate and significantly faster. And so if you apply that cost to the number of invoices you process in your group each month or each quarter or each year, those numbers can be absolutely massive for a large enterprise. And the other reason we include the best in class metrics is to really show what is possible given the world today, right? I'm going to show you some of their capabilities and how they use technology in a minute. But the reality is that the best in class are far from perfect, and they themselves have room for improvement. But to just look at invoice process straight through, right? Dramatically higher, right? Still not 100% or three quarters, but more than half of the invoices that come into a best-in-class AP operation go through touch, hands-free, right? Ready for payment to be scheduled, right? Fantastic. And that, in many ways is the holy grail of an AP department. The trends that you see, right? So more PO spend, you know, about half the time spent managing supplier inquiries, right? Because if you're operating in an automated environment, suppliers have the self-service capability in many cases to understand the status of their invoices, the status of their payments. But the all others group, right? If you think about it, that's about a quarter of an AP staffer's time spent responding to inquiries. It's far too high. And the reality is that as they respond to those inquiries, because it's taking so long, you assume that they're doing it in a much more manual environment. The responses that they're then going back to their suppliers are not going to be timely. They're going to be less accurate, and it creates friction in the supplier relationship. So very problematic. But I talked about where AP is becoming more strategic, and we'll talk about the best-in-class characteristics in a second. I think this is an area that maybe more than anything else has helped AP become more strategic, right? And that's the linkage to cash. Right. Dan Trache's got a long legacy of playing that technology intermediary, right? Again, whether you're an organization that has a treasury department, or there is a cash management function. And given the cost of capital today, given the cost of capital both to your own organization and to your suppliers, how and when you pay your suppliers should be strategic, right? It's a strategic operation. It's large dollars, and it's impactful to the bottom line. It's impactful to the supplier relationship as well. And so if there's not that connective tissue between AP to the cash management function, that raises a red flag to me.
Yeah, and I think if, when you look back 20 years and we talked about accounts payable being more tactical, the introduction of technology has helped the accounts payable team to be more strategic because it's got a view of everything, all of the supplier payments and leaders in accounts payable have a seat at the table with the CFO and with the treasury team because they have access to this information and they're custodians of the data, right? So anyone managing their P&L needs to include the accounts payable leadership in those decisions. We've actually seen a lot of synergy between accounts payable and accounts receivable around
Mhm.
clearance and compliance as well. So organizations that are going to market to ask vendors like Tradeshift about invoice clearance with tax authorities, they're looking for inbound invoicing and outbound invoicing solutions together rather than as
Yeah,
two separate entities. So I think this again lends itself to, the two departments working a little bit more in lockstep with each other around compliance, but also feeding information to the treasury team as well.
got it, got it. So now let's look a little bit at the characteristics of the best in class, and there's a lot of different technologies here. I mean, the main takeaway is that the best in class utilize or adopt technology to a greater degree. The numbers don't look so dramatic, just as stacked here, but on a percentage basis or on a comparative basis, the numbers are quite large. And the other factor around the best in class is success with technology is not only do they have it in place, but they are much more aggressive users of it, right? They're much more likely to show a fully automated task or activity versus the all others group. And it's a significant um, indication or it's a significant attribute that really drives a lot of those successful metrics that we showed 2 slides ago. On the capability side, right? This one as well, right? At some level, you would expect that, when you look at like the different AP capabilities that we have listed here, that every organization should be able to do these things. The reality is that the best in class do it to a much greater degree, but still not all of them, right? The ability to measure and report key AP metrics, right? Seemingly important as we move forward into it in this data-driven world. So lots of opportunities, no matter which maturity class you sit in. And so what's another indication, Dan, of how strategic AP is, right? And so these are the percentage of AP organizations that do these different types of have these different types of management strategies. And the point I would make here is, right, do you have do you have an annual strategic plan? Is the CFO engaged at all in what you're doing in AP? Are you communicating the department objectives to the staff, and are you linking those objectives to the staff, right? I mean, these are things that other parts of the organization are doing and have done for years. And the reality is that if you, as an AP organization, you as an AP leader, wanted to be, you want to be treated as a leader of a sophisticated and professional team, you need to start acting like one. So now we come to some strategies for success. And the report goes into great detail. We have bucketed those strategies into a couple of areas. I'll give you a few of the highlights because I do know that we have some questions that have come in. When we talk about recommendations for AI readiness, right? What are the things you need to do? You need to be thinking about your data. Doesn't need to be perfect. You need to think a little bit more about training because of the black box nature of how AI actually works to build trust and to also build in the right governance, making sure that the AI is functioning as it should and that you're checking it to make sure that it's being used within the framework and within the policies of your larger organization. A lot of what you see here is already being done within your company. Maybe it's by by IT. Maybe it's done by your AI counsel. So lots of opportunities here to leverage work that's being done by your organization today. We look at cash management, right? How do you elevate AP as a strategic financial lever? It's focus on this, it's improve this, it's share and communicate the information to those decision makers, right? It's not to act unilaterally as AP, it's to work in conjunction with the financial plan of the organization. Work with your finance director, your CFO, your treasurer. Um, it's to understand who your strategic suppliers are. It's to understand, the leverage of the relationship and the importance in the relationship. Supplier management, right? So, moving from sort of internal what's important to external what's important. How do Dan talked about the supplier onboarding process and how AI is being used by Tradeshift there. It's removing the friction out of the relationship, right? If your strategic suppliers primary conversations with your organization are around the invoice status and when are we getting paid? Are we getting paid? What are the details? That's a problem, right? We've gone through periods where suppliers have had to make decisions due to COVID and and constraints on their operations as to who's getting their available supply. You don't want to be the high cost, problematic customer. You want to be the most favored customer. Last area, business intelligence, right? The reality is, AI is coming. Um, you need to start thinking about that, right? It can be very hard to look 2 to 3, 5 years ahead if you're an organization that, has limited technology in place and to start thinking about where you need to be. But, the best data to plant an AI tree, Dan, was 20 years ago or whatever they say. The second best time is today. So start thinking about AI. You only get smarter as your own internal organization. There's a dividend. There's an once you automate your AP processes and get your hands around your metrics, there's an intelligence dividend that's paid to your group, that's paid to the cash management function, that's paid to your suppliers, it's paid to your stakeholders, it's paid to procurement. And so, Dan, tell us a little bit about Tradeshift.
Yeah, just a couple of slides just to introduce Tradeshift. So we're a global business network that's been in operation for about 15 years now. And we started on a pedigree of connecting organizations to achieve compliant e-invoicing. But we've since expanded that remit across best practice accounts payable transformation, e-procurement, and marketplaces. And our network continues to grow. It, you might have guessed that as a business network at the forefront of our minds are these kind of changing remits around e-invoicing compliance and integration with tax authorities and different clearance models. So what we're trying to do is continue to follow the lead of our customers in terms of where they operate and the changing mandates in those different countries to continue to support that activity and continue to grow our network beyond the current 69 countries that we do support. Um, we do operate in approximately 190 countries, many of which don't have e-invoicing mandates, but we do have connectivity in those geographies so that our customers' supply chains can submit invoices in a much more efficient way. Next slide, please. And yeah, we're compliant first by default. So Tradeshift has, for the last 10 or 11 years, been a PEPL access point provider, certified by Open PEPL, and we'll be going live next year, for example, with the changes in Belgium to support their PEPL model, and also in France, who are introducing a five-corner PEPL model. We've achieved the accreditation of a PA in France. So we're a service provider effectively who can be a gateway to the government and a gateway to compliant e-invoicing across France when they go live. And finally, on the next slide, a little bit about, we are AI native by default. I mentioned a couple of examples of where Tradeshift is implementing artificial intelligence around document intelligence on the front end and analytics. But we're continuously evolving our solution to try and drive better, faster processes for our AP customers. And if you're interested, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be sharing some information at the end of the call. Now we have managed to go the full
Mhm.
hour, Andrew, and I answered some questions live, so I don't
Mhm.
think we've got any remaining questions to answer. But we do have some additional resources. So if you'd like to learn more about reporting and analytics from TradeShift, there's a barcode there. If you'd like to download the State of ePayables report, there's a barcode there for you to download. We will send this via an email link after the session. And if you'd like to learn more about compliance mandates in the countries that TradeShift continues to support, the ever expanding list of changes that are taking place, feel free to use the barcode to access this asset. But I just want to say thank you for everybody attending, and we wish you well in the future, and feel free to reach out with any questions. Have a great day.
Thank you.